Module 8, the Central Nervous System, Brain Anatomy. It's time to get into studying the anatomy of the brain, but first, I want to give you two vocabulary terms. Gray matter refers to collections of neuron cell bodies and their associated neuroglia, and white matter refers to bundles of parallel axons and their coverings. So, in this image of a group of neurons and neuroglia, this is gray matter, where the neuron cell bodies and associated neuroglia are. And this is white matter, showing the axon bundles and their coverings. Now take a look at this magnetic resonance image of a brain. Magnetic resonance imaging, or MRI, is a technology that enables us to see internal organs of a living person. The colors you see here have been added to the image so that it's easier to see. This is an image of the brain's surface. It's characteristically folded in appearance, and that folded tissue on the outside is called the cerebrum. Now, this is a view of the brain if it's cut along the mid-sagittal plane. It's cut down the center from the ventral side of the body to the dorsal side of the body. So this mid-sagittal section divides the brain into a left and a right half. This area is the brain stem. It's made up of the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. At the medulla oblongata is the location of decussation. Decussation is the anatomical crossing over of neurons from left to right. I think of that word as decrossation because it's where the neurons of the brain anatomically crisscross each other, sending most signals from the right side of the brain to the left side of the body, and the left side of the brain to the right side of the body. Also, signals from the left side of the peripheral nervous system are sent to the right side of the brain, and vice versa. There's more decussation in the spinal cord where some nerves cross over from one side to the other, but most occurs at the medulla. And remember, I said most signals cross over. Some neurons, like cranial nerves, don't decussate. Well, why in the world is our body so crossed over like this? Why don't they stay on the same side of the body? Well, we're talking about brain structure right now, but hold on to that thought. I'll get back to it later. Now, the medulla also has specific groups of gray matter called nuclei. The nuclei behave as control centers for vital functions in the body. Vital functions are those functions of the body necessary for life. If you try to think about a function that your body does that's crucial for you to stay alive, you might think of your heart beating or breathing. And you're right. If your heart stopped beating or you stopped breathing, your body wouldn't survive very long. Well, those are vital functions controlled by the nuclei of the medulla. Another function that the medulla controls is the vasomotor area. This controls the dilation or constriction of blood vessels in the body, or making them wider or narrower in diameter. That controls your blood pressure. The nuclei in the medulla also control body reflexes such as swallowing and vomiting. You can imagine then that if the medulla becomes damaged, such as during a hard blow to the head, a person could suddenly die because their vital functions would be stopped. The word pons means bridge, and that's one of the things it does. It forms a bridge between the medulla and the upper brain stem. There are also nuclei located in the pons in order to relay messages between the cerebrum and the cerebellum located here in the brain. Some of the nuclei in the pons help to control ventilation, just like those in the medulla. This helps the body take in air, or inspiration, and it helps the body breathe out air, or expiration. The midbrain is located in the middle area of the brain, hence the name midbrain. There are 4 nuclei in the midbrain that form little mounds on its surface. 2 help with the identifying of sight, and 2 with identifying sound. If someone were to suddenly drop a stack of books behind you, you would instantly turn around to see what happened. The reflexes of turning toward that crashing sound and looking at it are a result of the control by the midbrain's nuclei. And because of its location, the midbrain is the location where many nerve pathways move from the brainstem to the upper brain areas. Now, there are some nuclei found throughout the entire brainstem. These are called the reticular formation, and they take in information from lots of afferent nerves, such as those coming in from the face. This group of brainstem nuclei and the connections they have with each other make up a complex called the reticular activating system. This system is very important because it plays a part in determining the cycle of sleeping and waking. The next brain section is called the diencephalon. The prefix di refers to in between, and cephalon refers to brain, so the diencephalon literally means between the brain. And indeed, it is the part between the brainstem and the cerebrum. The diencephalon is composed of the thalamus and the hypothalamus. You cannot see the thalamus well in this diagram, but it's much larger. What is visible from this angle is only a part of the thalamus called the intermediate mass. That's a small mass that connects the two sides of the thalamus located on either side of the mid-sagittal plane. It's kind of shaped like this. The thalamus is important for relaying information. Afferent axons, most of them coming from touch sensory neurons, come into this area and create synapses with neurons in the thalamus. We really don't exactly know what kind of interpretation of information occurs here, but there is some kind of information processing. Additionally, the thalamus is a relay station for motor neurons as they send signals coming from the brain to the spinal cord and then to the muscles. The thalamus also affects strong emotional moods and body movements. If you remember, the prefix hypo means below, as in hypodermic needle that goes below the dermis, then you will know that the hypothalamus is located below or inferior to the thalamus. It connects to the pituitary gland, which is just below. The hypothalamus uses nerve cell connections and hormones to control the pituitary gland, which is often called the master endocrine gland. The pituitary gland is responsible for secreting several hormones in the body that help to regulate and control metabolism, reproduction, urination, and stress responses, but it needs the hypothalamus to control it. Besides control of the pituitary, the hypothalamus also helps to regulate the autonomic nervous system, which deals with smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and glands. It also controls your body temperature. The largest part of your brain is the cerebrum. It deals with signal interpretation from the sensory system, as well as reasoning and memory. These are all higher-level brain functions that help us to think and remember. The cortex is the folded material on the outer surface of the cerebrum. It's made up of gray matter. We call the folds gyri, and they increase how much surface area you have on your brain. The grooves that the gyri create are called sulci. And though the folded pattern looks random, believe it or not, the main orientation of the gyri and sulci are pretty similar from one person to another. Though the cortex is thin, it contains up to 75% of our neuron cell bodies. That's why it appears gray in color. Just below the cortex is the white matter, which has clumps of gray matter dispersed throughout it. Those clumps are called nuclei. Another division of the brain is the cerebellum. It is primarily responsible for controlling functions that you are not conscious of, subconscious motor functions. These are functions like the slight contraction necessary to maintain muscle tone. You do not consciously have to remind your muscle cells to be partially recruited. That's a job for your cerebellum. This portion of the brain also helps to sequence muscle contractions. For example, say you want to pick up your dirty socks from the floor in your room and put them in a hamper. You have to extend your forearm, bend your torso, extend your fingers, and contract them over the socks. Then straighten your torso, bend your forearm, rotate your torso towards the hamper, extend your forearm again, and finally extend your fingers so that you release the socks. All this happens without you really having to think about each step. Your cerebellum controls this intricate sequencing of the muscles so that you do the movement seamlessly. Another responsibility of the cerebellum is called muscle preset. Have you ever seen those artificial landscape rocks? They're hollow fiberglass or plastic shapes that are painted to look just like real rocks. Well, say you were going to pick up one of those rocks, but you didn't know it was artificial. When you lift it, you almost throw it up in the air because you were prepared to lift using a lot of strength. This is because you have learned about the world around you and you've preset your muscles to a specific strength of contraction. You've learned in the past that rocks are heavy, so your cerebellum has set that memory so that when you need to lift any rocks, you are prepared that they will be heavy. Yet another job for the cerebellum is dampening. Imagine you're walking along holding a yo-yo that is suspended by a string. As you walk, the yo-yo behaves like a pendulum and begins to wildly swing. How come your arms don't do that? They're also kind of like hanging pendulums. Well, they don't because as you walk, your cerebellum sends inhibitory signals to the motor neurons of your arms, dampening the potential pendulum effect. There's some research that your moods and emotions are partially controlled by your cerebellum, but for the most part, you can think of your cerebellum as being the control center for your subconscious motor functions.